National Signing Day for college football is on the horizon. And while most top recruits have already committed or signed to their teams already, there are still some top prospects like Nicholas Harbor, Cormani McLean, and Deuce Robinson that are still being fought over. But almost all the media attention and coverage has surrounded one player all season. Arch Manning is not only a top-ranked prospect in all the country by most scouts and outlets, he's also the nephew of NFL legends Peyton and Eli Manning. Almost everyone is confident the future Texas Longhorn QB1 is going to be the next generational QB prospect and a future franchise star in the NFL. But I started to wonder, what happened to the other top-ranked recruits from past recruiting classes? Did they manage to live up to the hype of being ranked the absolute best player out of about 300,000 high school football seniors? To answer that, we'll go back to the year 2000, as that's about as far back as most online databases go. In 2000, middle linebacker DJ Williams out of De La Salle High School in Concord, California was ranked as the #1 recruit. DJ actually played both linebacker and running back in high school and broke the school record on offense for touchdowns in a season, while also being the USA Today Defensive Player of the Year. This rushing experience would actually come in handy as he chose to head to the other coast and attend the University of Miami. With the University of Miami at the height of their powers competing for national championships, they had a stacked linebacker room just as every position group that they had, with future first-rounders Dan Morgan and Jonathan Vilma. To get playtime in his freshman season, Williams served as a fullback for the team and collected 193 yards and 2 touchdowns. In his sophomore year, he moved back to linebacker and had a solid but quiet 50-tackle season, but had a huge forced fumble in the national championship game against Nebraska, a game Miami would go on to win 37-14. In 2002, DJ finally came on the scene and showed his potential, finishing as a Butkus Award finalist, a trophy given to the best linebacker in the country, after collecting 108 tackles, 4 sacks, and 2 forced fumbles. And as a senior, he finally started to live up to that billing of #1 prospect in the country, as he finished with 86 tackles, 6 sacks, and a forced fumble. He was named third-team All-American and also carried this critical fake punt late in the game against Florida State to hold on for an Orange Bowl victory. He entered the draft as a projected mid to late first-round pick and was eventually picked at the 17th overall pick by the Denver Broncos, just 5 picks after his linebacker teammate Jonathan Vilma. After a pretty great 114-tackle, 2-sack rookie campaign, Williams finished just short of the Defensive Rookie of the Year award, losing it to, of course, Jonathan Vilma. Williams has moved to strong side linebacker for his next 2 seasons, and his production fell off as he really wasn't as good of a fit there. But in his 4th season was moved back to middle linebacker, where he had a career-high 141 tackles. Over the following 4 seasons, Williams would serve as a productive but never quite superstar linebacker for the Broncos. During the 2012 season though, the aging Williams would get suspended 9 games for PED use, somehow only 2 games less than what sexual assault of 20-plus massage therapists in the Houston area gets you. After the season, DJ was released by the Broncos and had 2 pretty uneventful seasons in Chicago. While he never made a Pro Bowl, unlike former teammate Jonathan Vilma, Williams going on to become a first-round pick, 11-year vet, and earning $24 million, I'd call that a success. 2001, the top prospect would emerge out of the East Coast this time at Cardinal O'Hara High School in Springfield, Pennsylvania. Kevin Jones is not only a star football running back, but also put his elite athleticism on display on the track as well as a track and field star. Jones led Cardinal O'Hara to the Philadelphia Catholic League Championship in his final season and was named the first ever U.S. Army Player of the Year. The Pennsylvania native surprised the country when he chose out-of-state Virginia Tech over Penn State on National Signing Day by ripping his sweater off to reveal a Mike Vick jersey. You can thank him for all the reveals with hats and jerseys that players now do on National Signing Day, as he was the first to do it back in 2001. Jones started as a freshman after an early season-ending injury to starting running back Lee Suggs and rushed for 957 yards and 5 touchdowns. Then the next season splitting the backfield with Suggs doing his part, contributing 871 yards and 9 touchdowns to Suggs' 1,325 and 22 touchdowns as part of the untouchable duo. Jones would get the full reins in his junior year, with Suggs declaring for the NFL draft and getting picked in the 4th round by the Browns. Jones had an even better season than Suggs' final year at 1,647 yards and 21 touchdowns, finishing with the 3rd best rushing season in Virginia Tech history, and after declaring for the draft following the Hokies' Inside Bowl loss, the 2nd most rushing yards in school history. Kevin Jones is projected to be one of the first 2 running backs off the board in a toss-up between him and Steven Jackson. Jackson would get picked 24th overall by the Rams, and Jones would actually get jumped by Michigan's Chris Perry, getting picked at 26 by the Bengals. Jones wouldn't fall far though, as he would get picked up 30th overall by the Detroit Lions. Just 13 picks after 2000's number 1 prospect, DJ. He would have a very successful rookie year, rushing for over 1,000 yards, but that would actually turn out to be the best year of his career, never going for over 700 in a year again. After a season-ending injury in 2007, the Lions released him. Jones only played one more year in the NFL for Chicago, then 2 games in the Canadian Football League before retiring. A somewhat disappointing end to a promising prospect, but as far as I'm concerned, if you get picked in the first round, I call you a success. Much better than the 17th overall player and number 2 rated quarterback in Jones's class, Joe Mauer, who never even made an NFL roster. Oh yeah, that Joe Mauer. Before declaring for the MLB draft out of high school, Mauer actually committed to playing quarterback at Florida State. When he did decide to declare for the MLB draft, he was the easy first overall pick after batting over 600 in his senior high school season without striking out a single time. And I'd say that pick worked out pretty well for future MVP Joe Mauer and the Twins. So I guess I can't blame him too much for not making an NFL roster. 2002's top prospect was Houston sensation Vince Young. Young started at quarterback for Madison High School, where he would amass 12,987 yards of offense over 3 years and would lead his team in his senior season to a regionals win. Then he did everything to put his otherwise not highly regarded team on his back, making it to the state semifinals before losing to Austin Westlake 48-42, even though Young put up 400 passing yards, 92 rushing, and 6 total touchdowns. All the while wearing number 10 to honor his mom, who he credits with keeping him off the streets and on the right path, since her birthday is June 10th. A number he would also wear on his college jersey at the only university the number 1 prospect that the state of Texas had seen in decades could possibly attend without being hated. After redshirting in his first season at Texas, Young split QB playing time with Chance Mock, where Mock was used more as the traditional pocket passing quarterback type, and Young was used more for his elite ability as a runner. In 2004, Young took over the full-time job, leading the Longhorns to an 11-1 season and a Rose Bowl victory over Michigan after putting up 1,849 yards through the air and 1,079 on the ground. Young was still developing as a passer, as he had more touchdowns running than passing in both his first 2 seasons, but 2005 would be a different story. In his final season at Texas, Vince had one of the greatest quarterback seasons in college football history. He evolved as a passer with 3,036 yards, 26 touchdowns to just 10 interceptions, not to mention his 1,050 yards and 12 touchdowns with his legs. Texas went 11-0, putting up 40-plus points against all but one opponent and won the Big 12 championship. A season that in most years would earn you the rank of number 1 in the nation going into the national championship. But most seasons don't have a team from Hollywood that's on a 34-game win streak and has 2 Heisman winners on it.
You like USC? Hell no! USC? Hell no! You like USC? Hell no! I know that's right.
This set the stage for one of the greatest games in college football history in the 2006 Rose Bowl, where after 467 yards of total offense from Young, with 20 seconds left and down by 4, Texas needed a touchdown, and Young, as he did all season, gave it to them on one of the most memorable runs in football history. After this, he won almost every award imaginable except the Heisman to go along with his championship trophy, including the Davey O'Brien and the Maxwell. It seemed set for a perfect story, as the Houston kid who was heading into the draft as the number 1 quarterback in all the land could lead the new Houston franchise, who had a bust at QB and the number 1 overall pick, to the promised land. Unfortunately though, the Texans didn't want to be involved in his story. Back in 2006, the league wasn't as it is today, with many thriving mobile QBs like Lamar Jackson, Patrick Mahomes, and Josh Allen. Michael Vick was almost the only one, and he was kind of thought to be one of a kind. Apparently, the Texans didn't even see him as a first-round talent, and ended up going Mario Williams, an edge rusher, with the first overall pick. Vince Young would later go on to say that if he knew the Texans didn't plan on drafting him with that first overall pick, he would have gone back to UT for his senior season. There was no chance of him going second because the Saints just picked up Drew Brees in free agency, so all eyes were on the Titans. In an opposite turn of events of what is usually the case when a team is considering drafting a quarterback at the top of a draft, Longtime QB of the Titans, Steve McNair, actually wanted Tennessee to pick Vince Young as they were personal friends, and the aging McNair wanted him to be his heir apparent. On the other hand, the coaches actually wanted to draft Matt Leinart instead, but ownership would overrule them and end up going with Vince Young. Vince Young had a promising start to his NFL career, winning Rookie of the Year after leading the Titans to an 8-8 record after they started 0-3 without him starting at quarterback. In 2007, he would struggle to start off, but really started to develop into a better passer, hitting a career high in Denver of 305 passing yards, but finished the season with a rough touchdown to INT ratio of 9-17. In 2008, Vince started the season injured, but was ready to come back by week 4. But Jeff Fisher decided to bench him for the rest of the season, going with Kerry Collins instead, and it's hard to say it didn't pay off for the Titans as they went 13-3. Young started into the next season as the backup again, but after an 0-6 start and a 59-0 loss to the Patriots, ownership forced Coach Fisher to go with Young over Collins. Young went 8-2 in his starts, made the Pro Bowl, and won Comeback Player of the Year. But at 27, it was a little late for him to start developing. And just the next season, he was released by the Titans after an argument with the coaching staff. He bounced around a little bit after that, but never really got another chance. Vince Young was one of the greatest college quarterbacks of all time, but in my opinion had his talents wasted by a coaching staff that never wanted him in the first place. If he had been drafted somewhere else, maybe his career ends up like the storybook it was shaping up to be. All things considered though, Young was still a hit. Our next best prospect, this time 2003, was Ernie Sims of North Florida Christian High School. Sims actually got offered a spot on his high school's varsity team before he was even in high school, getting the offer when he was in the 8th grade. Sims was recruited as a linebacker but also played running back for his high school team, leading them to 4 state championships, and in his senior season had 133 tackles, 15 for loss, 6 forced fumbles, along with 1,081 rushing yards and 23 touchdowns. Probably the most intimidating man ever named, Ernie had his choice of schools to play for, but being from Tallahassee, it was only natural that he committed to play for Florida State. Just to set the stage for how anticipated he was, Sims wore number 34 for the Seminoles, a number that had been retired since 1985 for College Football Hall of Famer Ron Sellers, before Sellers gave Sims his blessing to wear it. And it's maybe a stretch to say Sims reached the heights that Sellers did, but he at least did the number justice. After a solid true freshman season, Sims broke out as a sophomore with 86 tackles, 4.5 sacks, and 2 forced fumbles, earning him first team All-American. He regressed slightly as a junior, but was still good enough to be projected as a late first-round pick. However, he was picked far earlier than expected, going just 6 picks after Vince Young at 9th overall to the Lions. Sims had a very solid first 3 years in Detroit, going for over 100 tackles in all 3 years, but never really lived up to the top 10 pick. He only started half of the Lions games in 2009 and was then traded for Tony Scheffler in a 7th round pick. Sims played 1 year there, then 1 in Indianapolis before a 2-year stint with the Cowboys as a backup in 2012 and 2013. An overall disappointing career for a top 10 pick as he was out of the league after that, but is now a linebackers coach at UCF, and don't be surprised if you see him as a defensive coordinator somewhere sometime soon. 2004's top recruit in the nation is a first I think we can all say lived up to the hype, not just in college but into the NFL as well. Introducing Palestine High School's Adrian Peterson. Peterson rushed for 2,051 yards and 22 touchdowns in his junior year for the Texas high school, numbers eclipsed by his senior ones going for 2,960 and 32 touchdowns. He was so good, some players on the opposing teams were already asking for his autographs after the games. Peterson was born into an athletic family, his father a star high school basketball player and his mom a 2-time Texas state champion in track and field. Peterson, as the top recruit, had his pick of the litter when it came to universities, but turned down the top Texas schools UT and A&M, along with Miami, Arkansas, and UCLA, to narrow his choices down to the 2 teams that would actually face each other just a year later in the national championship game: Oklahoma and USC. Ultimately, a sticking point for Peterson was his father, who was incarcerated at the time of AP's recruiting. If he attended Oklahoma, his father would be able to watch all of his games, but not if he attended USC. That didn't stop USC from trying though, as Ed Orgeron went as far as to try to get his father transferred to a prison in LA, but he couldn't pull it off, so off to Oklahoma Peterson went. Somehow Peterson exceeded expectations in his first season, rushing for almost 2,000 yards and 15 touchdowns. 3 separate games above 200 yards, finishing as a first-team All-American and second in Heisman voting, leading Oklahoma to a national championship game against USC where they would fall 55-19, ending the Sooners' perfect season bid. Despite a broken foot during the season, Peterson still finished his next season above 1,000 yards, but didn't have the chance to improve on the previous year. AP started right back where he left off in 2006, gaining almost 1,000 yards and 10 touchdowns in just 6 games, but in a game against Iowa State, Peterson broke his collarbone and had to sit for the rest of the regular season. Oklahoma went undefeated in the games without him though, and Peterson returned in time for the legendary Fiesta Bowl against Boise State. He only had 77 yards but had 2 touchdowns in that game, but they would lose on 2 of the most memorable plays in BCS bowl game history. Despite the 2 injuries, AP was still considered a lock for a top 10 pick in the 2007 draft. And at number 7, Peterson would find his home for the next 10 years in Minnesota. Most of you already know the story of the great Adrian Peterson, and this video is mostly about telling unheard stories, so I'll go through his relatively quick or else we'd be here forever. In his first year, Peterson put up 1,341 yards and 12 touchdowns in just 14 games as a rookie, winning Offensive Rookie of the Year and making his first of 7 Pro Bowls. He would make that season look pedestrian in his second year with a league-leading 1,760 yards on the ground and 10 touchdowns, finishing 4th in MVP voting. Peterson's numbers regress back to around what he did in his first year after Brett Favre came to town, not to steal money from poor Mississippians, but to lead the Vikings to the NFC Championship game, where they would come up just short of a Super Bowl appearance, even though AP did all he could with 122 yards and 3 touchdowns in the game. Peterson had another 2 great seasons after this before his immaculate 2012 season. In 2012, Peterson passed the 2,000 mark on the season along with 12 touchdowns, averaging 131 yards per game on the way to winning MVP, an almost impossible feat in the NFL as a non-QB, all after tearing his ACL the year before. 2013 was not quite as good, but he still put up a Pro Bowl worthy year. He had his 2014 season wiped out by child abuse charges after beating his son so bad with a switch that he had bruises. But 2015, I don't know how to transition out of that, but 2015 was right back up to the top with 1,485 yards and 11 touchdowns in what would ultimately be his last Pro Bowl level season. In 2016, he tore his meniscus early on in the season in what would ultimately be his last appearance in a Vikings uniform. He signed with the Saints and was then traded to the Cardinals for a 6th-round pick, not being very productive for either. Peterson had a resurrection of sorts in Washington, rushing for 1,000 yards and 898 in back-to-back seasons. He then bounced to the Lions and the Titans and the Seahawks, and is now a free agent heading into probable retirement where he's a lock for the Hall of Fame. From Vince Young to AP, Rivals.com and 24/7 Sports had agreed on the top recruit, but in 2005 there was a split. So we'll talk a little about both. 24/7 Sports had offensive tackle Eugene Monroe out of Plainfield, New Jersey, ranked as the #1 recruit. But Rivals.com had Derrick Williams out of Greenbelt, Maryland, a player that could best be described as a pure athlete playing quarterback, running back, and wide receiver. After Penn State was coming off their 4th losing season in 5 years, the last thing anyone expected was for them to be the one to land #1 recruit Derrick Williams. This was a huge opportunity for the program to get back in the national spotlight, and Derrick Williams did help them get there, just not in the way you'd maybe expect. Williams signed with Penn State pretty early on and started doing some recruiting on his own to get some guys to come play with him at Beaver Stadium. And it worked, getting guys like Sean Lee, Justin King, and Jerome Hayes all to commit. Justin King actually interviewed Derrick Williams a couple months ago on his podcast, Blue Chip Academy. If you want a more in-depth breakdown of their experience at Penn State, I'll link it in the description, but I'll be referencing a couple things they talked about here. Derrick had a modest but strong start to his true freshman year. Used as a running back and a wide receiver, he was an impact player early on, even having a game-winning catch against Northwestern in just his 4th game. Through 6 games, he had 230 receiving and 97 rushing yards and did good work in the return game too, having Penn State at 6-0. But in his 7th, he broke his arm against Michigan, a game the team would go on to lose, the only game that they would go on to lose all season. Williams came back ready his sophomore season, but never really had a breakout performance, putting up 440 yards receiving and 145 yards rushing with just 3 total touchdowns. Penn State would follow up a 9-4 season in his sophomore year with another one in his junior year. Williams improved slightly, upping his totals to 529 yards receiving and 101 on the ground with 5 touchdowns. In his senior year, he showed bright spots like his game against Illinois, where he had 241 all-purpose yards and a receiving, rushing, and kick return touchdown, but overall had somewhat of a disappointing time at Penn State from what would have been expected from a top recruit. Going into the draft, his stock wasn't as high as other past top prospects, as being such a do-it-all guy may have actually hurt him in the long run, as Penn State never really focused on coaching him up to be great at just any one thing.
If we were a jack of all trades, right? Where you can put us at running back, you can put us at quarterback, you can put us at receiver, but it also hurts you too when you go to the next level and they might not have that vision for you, because now you're a jack of all trades but not a master at anything. You know what I mean? And that kind of might have hit me in my NFL career, because, you know, hey, I was probably a B plus as a running back. I was a B at receiver. I might have been a C or a B plus at quarterback. But when you gonna be that A, bro? I need you to be that A right now.
Derrick Williams' athleticism still had value though, as he was picked in the 3rd round of the 2009 draft by the Detroit Lions. His career never really materialized though, as he only had 82 total receiving yards in his career and mostly served as a kick returner. While Williams' career wasn't as vaunted as necessarily hoped for, he did end up turning around Penn State from where they were, with his recruiting help. As in his 4 years there, they won an Orange Bowl, an Outback Bowl, an Alamo Bowl, and made a Rose Bowl appearance. In fact, Penn State has never even had a losing season outside the COVID year since Williams committed to play there 18 years ago. As for Eugene Monroe, 24/7 Sports top prospect of 2005, he never allowed a sack after his freshman year at Plainfield High. So it's easy to see why, along with being listed at 6'5", 300 pounds, he was considered the top prospect by many. Monroe chose Virginia over many other suitors. He was solid all throughout his career there, but really in his senior season is when he blossomed into one of the best linemen in the entire country. He was drafted 8th overall by Jacksonville and was their cornerstone at left tackle for 4.5 years before they traded him to Baltimore, where the Ravens handed him a $37.5 million deal over 5 years. He wouldn't play much for the Ravens though, as Monroe dealt with injury after injury once he got there and was released by the team just 2 years later. His release might have actually been connected to his advocacy for cannabis for NFL players for the purposes of pain management, trying to get the substance taken off the NFL's banned list. He has continued this pursuit into retirement, and the league is now looking at changing policies, possibly soon too. In 2006, there was once again a split among scouts about who they thought the best prospect in the class was. Rivals.com went with the electric Percy Harvin, and 24/7 Sports went with yet another lineman in Andre Smith out of Birmingham, Alabama. After his elite high school career at Huffman High, Andre Smith Jr. was compared to the likes of NFL legend and Hall of Famer Orlando Pace. So, to say the least, the expectations were pretty high. He chose Alabama as his university and started from day one as a true freshman and was dominant from the start. In his sophomore and junior seasons, he was named All-SEC and an All-American once as well. Smith headed into the 2009 draft as the possible number 1 overall pick, but his stock fell after a poor combine showing. Not too far though, as the Bengals would pick him at number 6 overall, just 2 picks ahead of Eugene Monroe. After 2 injury-prone seasons as a backup to start his career, he broke out in 2011 and became the Bengals' full-time starter for the next 5 years. And while he was never in the Pro Bowl, he was one of the most consistent starters in the league over that period. After that, he headed to the Vikings for a year that was cut short by a tricep injury before bouncing back to Cincinnati. Then heading to the Cardinals, where he had an elbow injury that got him cut by the team, which would allow him to sign just 10 days later back again in Cincinnati. He was on the Ravens practice squad in 2021, but wasn't signed to a team this past season. Overall though, a successful NFL career that may not have lived up to the standards of Orlando Pace, but pretty respectable at the end of the day. William Percival Harvin III, or Percy, dominated at Lansdowne High School, and in his 3 years as a starter led his team to 3 straight state championship appearances and 1 state championship win, all while scoring 77 total touchdowns. Harvin was thought to be attending Florida State, but flipped to the University of Florida to play for Urban Meyer. Harvin once won 4 state track championships in 1 meet in 2005, winning the long jump, triple jump, 100 meters, and 200 meters, making him an all-around athletic threat once he got to Gainesville. He played as a true freshman against the non-conference opponents to start the season and did well, but a combination of talent on the roster in front of him and minor injuries meant that Harvin didn't really see much play time during the SEC season. He showed flashes in games against South Carolina and of course Florida State, but it wasn't until the SEC championship when he really exploded onto the national scene. Percy was what many expected of Derrick Williams a few years ago, as he had 105 rushing yards, 67 of which came on one touchdown run, and 62 receiving yards, including a 37-yard touchdown catch, and was named the game's MVP as Florida was on the way to the national championship game after a 12-1 season. He was less productive in that game, but still impactful with 82 total yards and a touchdown in a blowout natty victory for the Gators over Ohio State. Expectations were high heading into his sophomore season, but Harvin delivered. He had over 100 all-purpose yards in 7 of his 11 games, with monster games against Tennessee, Ole Miss, and Auburn as a receiver, then incredible ones as a rusher in his last 3 against Vanderbilt, Florida State, and Michigan in the Capital One Bowl. He did all he could, but the Gators finished well below expectations at 9-4 after the national championship season. The Gators would get back to championship winning ways the next season though, with a win over Oklahoma in the big game. Harvin's yardage was a little less than it was the previous season, but was playing through injuries for most of it. He even played the national championship game with a high ankle sprain and a hairline fracture. That didn't really slow him down though, because he put up 171 total yards and a touchdown in a game where they needed his offense. After running just a 4.39 at the combine, I know pretty fast, but people were expecting even faster from the former track star. Plus, testing positive for marijuana, people had his draft stock dropping out of the first round entirely, considering those two along with his injury history. But at 22nd overall, it was the Vikings who took a chance on the Florida product, teaming him up with 2004's #1 recruit Adrian Peterson. And just like Peterson, was named Offensive Rookie of the Year and made the Pro Bowl as a returner in his first season. He improved from 790 receiving to 868 in his second season, then took off, showing major promise in his third, with 967 receiving yards to go along with 345 rushing and 8 total touchdowns. An injury the next season held Harvin back from what he was on pace for, which was the best season of his career. Despite this, the Vikings traded him to the Seahawks in the offseason for a first, a third, and a 7th round pick. Harvin wasn't complaining though, as he got paid with a 6-year, $67 million deal. The injuries came ringing for Percy again though, as he only got to play 1 regular season game in his first year in Seattle. But he did contribute to the Super Bowl blowout over the Broncos with a kick return touchdown, earning himself a ring, which is the first on this list. Overall though, the Seahawks took a major L on this trade, trading him to the Jets the next season for just a 6th round pick. He had a solid but nowhere near Vikings level year in New York before a forgettable and once again injury-plagued stint in Buffalo, and then retirement. A promising start to a career that fizzled out, not to any fault or lack of talent on the part of Percy Harvin III, but like many others, because he just couldn't stay on the field. In 2007, 24/7 Sports and Rivals once again disagreed, get used to it, but ESPN's databases dates back this far, so we'll use them as the tiebreaker. Rivals.com graded as the #1 prospect a QB out of Thousand Oaks, California, future 2nd round pick Jimmy Clausen. But 24/7 Sports and ESPN went with a running back who had an all-time great football last name as the #1 recruit in the nation. New Orleans native, Joe McKnight. If you're doing the math, you know his high school career was interrupted by Hurricane Katrina, which actually destroyed his family's home before his junior year. But this adversity couldn't stop him though, as he led his high school, John Curtis Christian, to back-to-back state titles. He was seen as the next Reggie Bush, but that comparison wasn't expected to lead to his landing place being the same as Reggie's, as everyone in the Louisiana area expected him to attend LSU. But McKnight chose to head to USC, something that angered the community so much that his high school's marching band was booed at a Mardi Gras parade, even though McKnight had nothing to do with the marching band. McKnight's best game of his freshman season came in a Rose Bowl victory over Illinois with 170 total yards and a touchdown, but otherwise took a backseat to Chauncey Washington for most of the year. Joe had some impressive games in his second season, but never really broke out in the way that people expected him to, and had been dealing with an injury for most of the season. He would have a 143-yard game against Arizona State one week, and the next only have 16 in Tucson. He played against Derrick Williams in the 2009 Rose Bowl that USC won again, but only put up 22 yards. Again, as a junior, McKnight had a solid but unspectacular year that failed to live up to the hype that his talent had promised. McKnight didn't want to come back for his senior season after Pete Carroll left for the NFL and declared for the draft. He fell all the way to the 4th round where the Jets finally grabbed him to give the top prospect another chance. He barely saw any playtime in his first season and actually played some cornerback, something he hadn't done since his first 2 years of high school. McKnight rarely saw offensive snaps for the next 2 years, but was pretty good in the return game before getting released at the start of the 2013 season. He played 2 games for the Chiefs before tearing his Achilles in practice, ultimately ending up being his last appearance in the NFL. But he would start a CFL career the next season, having a few successful games with the Saskatchewan Roughriders in 2016. Joe McKnight never got the chance to play for them in 2017 though. On December 1st, 2017, Joe McKnight was killed at just 28 years old in Terrytown, Louisiana after a road rage incident. McKnight's killer was sentenced to 10 years in prison, but it was a far cry from comforting compensation for the family that McKnight leaves behind. While not the superstar player that scouts expected, McKnight had much promise and value as a human being, that which was taken away far too soon. 2008's class had another split at the top, with Rivals.com going with Terrell Pryor, a quarterback from Pennsylvania who would go on to play at Ohio State. But 24/7 Sports and ESPN went with Bamberg-Earnhardt High School's Daquan Bowers. As a high school senior, Bowers played defensive end and running back, getting 97 tackles, 33 for loss, and 14 sacks to go along with 1,200 rushing yards and 19 touchdowns, returned kicks for an average of 40 yards per kick return, and blocked 7 different kicks. The South Carolina kid committed to play at Clemson as early as his sophomore year in high school and never wavered. After his insane senior season in high school, he drew comparisons to NFL legends like Reggie White and Bruce Smith. Lofty expectations that he wouldn't quite live up to in his first 2 years at Clemson in 2008 and 2009, although he did put up solid numbers. His junior year is when he really started to live up to the praise though, putting up 67 tackles, 26 for loss, and led the nation with 15.5 sacks. He was an All-American and won the Nagurski Award, being named the best defensive player in all of college football. After such a season, Bowers obviously declared for the draft, and after Andrew Luck decided to go back to Stanford for one more year, was seen at the top of draft boards along with the likes of Cam Newton, Von Miller, Marcel Darius, and Patrick Peterson as the possible number 1 overall pick. His knee had other plans though. Medical reports came out that his knee injury that he suffered in his sophomore season might be more of a chronic injury like degenerative arthritis. This revelation scared teams off so much that he fell to 51st in the draft, all the way to the Buccaneers, who finally took him off the board. Bowers was, unfortunately, as predicted, injury-prone once he got to the league and started sparingly throughout his 5-year career in Tampa, only recording 69 total tackles and 7 sacks for his career. After 2015, Bowers never got another chance in the NFL, but played 1 season in the CFL before retiring entirely. He's now the defensive line coach at USF and hopes to work up the coaching ladder in the NCAA. Hopefully we see him as a defensive coordinator or head coach soon, but it's hard not to wonder what could have been with Daquan Bowers if not for the injuries. With his play at Clemson, it's not hard to imagine he would have been an all-time great in the NFL if it wasn't for his knee. And on to the final year of this video, 2009, where another split would have to be tie-broken by ESPN. And once again, they would side with 24/7 Sports, as Rivals.com went with a running back out of Wichita, Kansas by the name of Bryce Brown. ESPN and 24/7 Sports went with a quarterback, Newport Beach's own, modern-day alumni, Matt Barkley. Barkley started as a freshman for the prestigious Mater Dei program, the first quarterback to do so since Todd Marinovich in the 80s. That freshman season was ended in the playoffs by future college teammate Alan Bradford when he shattered his collarbone. Bradford wouldn't even end up being a defender, he ended up being a running back next to him in college. He did well as a sophomore, but lit it up in his junior year, winning Gatorade National Player of the Year in 2007. USC would land the signing of the quarterback that some were calling a cross between Joe Montana and Tom Brady. Talk about no pressure. His senior season was a cause for some concern though, as he started the season throwing almost as many picks as touchdowns. But he picked up the pace to finish off the season and remained the top prospect. Matt Barkley stepped onto the scene at USC with immediate pressure. The Trojans were coming off back-to-back Rose Bowl victories and were looking to put together another national championship season. Although with Mark Sanchez declaring for the 2009 draft, they weren't quite sure who the starting quarterback would be. After battling for the spot with 2 others, Matt Barkley was named the first ever true freshman USC quarterback to start a season opener. Barkley wasn't amazing against San Jose State in the opener, but was good enough with 233 yards and a touchdown to let the rest of the team dominate with 342 yards and 6 TDs in the running game. 145 of which was from Joe McKnight in USC's 56-3 victory. His second game was a lot bigger of a test, having to go up to Columbus to face the number 8 ranked Ohio State Buckeyes. But the moment wasn't too big for Barkley as he led a game-winning drive in the fourth, but did only have 195 yards and a pick. He had to sit the next game after an injury and had to watch from the sidelines as his number 3 ranked team in the country fell to unranked Washington. He returned to lead USC to 4 straight victories, including his best game of the season over rival Notre Dame with 380 yards and 2 touchdowns. But down the stretch they fell to Oregon, Stanford, and Arizona to fall completely out of the rankings heading into the Emerald Bowl against Boston College. They did at least win that game, but overall the season was a major disappointment from what was expected. Between the 2009 and 2010 seasons, Pete Carroll, USC's head coach, in the midst of the Reggie Bush scandal fallout, jumped ship for Seattle, returning back to the NFL and leaving Lane Kiffin in charge of a program that had just been banned from bowl games for the next 2 years. The team had a ton of talent, but this scandal clouded the program for years to come, and it also meant unless Barkley wanted to come back and play as a senior, he would never get a chance to compete for a national championship. Barkley had a solid 2010 with 2,800 yards and 26 touchdowns to 12 picks, with the Trojans going 8-5 under the new coaching staff. While Barkley was good in his first 2 seasons, the stats don't exactly scream number 1 prospect. But 2011 is when he would put himself back in that conversation. He set record after record in the passing game that season with a school record 468 yards in a single game against Arizona and a USC record 6 touchdowns in a game against Colorado, a feat he would accomplish just 3 weeks later again against UCLA. These 2 games, along with other great performances throughout the year, helped Barkley throw a Pac-12 record 39 touchdowns while only being intercepted 7 times and completing nearly 70% of his throws, and helped USC to a 10-2 record. Still without a bowl game appearance though. Many expected Barkley to declare for the draft as he was seen as the clear number 2 prospect, only to the near perfect quarterback prospect Andrew Luck, even ranked above RG3. But now that USC had served its 2-year bowl ban, Barkley decided, like Luck the year before, to come back to LA for 1 more year for unfinished business. USC started the season as the number 1 ranked team in the country and with Barkley as the number 1 prospect in the 2013 draft. The season wouldn't go anywhere close to his hope though. After 2 non-conference wins against Hawaii and Syracuse, Barkley still could not get past Stanford even without Luck in the way, losing 41-20 while throwing 2 picks. Overall, Barkley had a solid season and put up 6 touchdowns against Colorado again, but USC fell well short of expectations and headed into the crosstown rivalry week with 3 losses and a lower rank than UCLA. Matt played okay with 301 yards and 3 touchdowns, but 2 interceptions to go along with them. He had them still in it late, but an Anthony Barr tackle would separate his shoulder and end his season. USC was hopeless against number 1 Notre Dame the next week and lost to Georgia Tech in the Sun Bowl. Before his shoulder injury, Barkley was still projected $4 years, $2.73 million. Philadelphia wasn't the ideal scenario for him either if he was hoping for a comeback story. The Eagles already had 2 quarterbacks on roster with Michael Vick and Nick Foles. Those 2 were both hurt in weeks 7 and 8 though, so Barkley actually saw some playtime, although he didn't look that great. He had 287 yards and only led the offense to 10 points. And you might be thinking, well, that's not great, but that's not horrible for a rookie quarterback. And that'd be true if that wasn't the combined stats for those 2 games, along with 4 interceptions. He never even got another chance with the Eagles as he only threw 1 more pass attempt in 2014. He was then traded to the Cardinals for a 7th round pick where he never even ended up playing. Barkley had his most success in 2016 with the Bears, starting 6 games, including a 316-yard performance against the Titans and 362 yards against the Packers, which is the most a Bears quarterback has ever put up against the Packers. The Bears have always had shit quarterbacks, huh? Damn, how is that true? How could that be possible? They play the Packers twice a year. How is Matt Barkley the all-time leader against the Packers? That's insane. After this, he bounced from San Francisco to Arizona again, to Buffalo, then Tennessee, Carolina, Atlanta, then back to Buffalo, always as a backup or a practice squad player. Not the career many scouts envisioned for the top prospect of 2009, but a journeyman is better than nothing. And it's pretty hard to live up to a Tom Brady, Joe Montana fusion. So, I don't really blame him. And that's going to do it for part 1 of this series. Part 2 will be coming soon. How soon depends on you guys. If you guys really like this series, really like this video, let me know down in the comments. Let me know by liking the video, let me know by subscribing. I'm assuming if you made it this far and are listening to this, you probably enjoyed it, so, you know, why not come back for the second part? This is the longest video by far that I've ever made for sure. I don't know how long it's going to be, but I wrote about 16 pages for this, so I'm assuming pretty long. Hopefully I get this out sooner rather than later, but assuming by how long this video is going to be, I'm assuming it's going to take a while to edit. I want to get this out before National Signing Day, but at this point I doubt it, to be honest, so you know, hopefully it came out around that time. Anyways, that's going to do it for this video. I hope to upload more consistently. I try to do every week, but it's really hard with me going to college right now. But I try to do as much as I can, and you know, I appreciate any support I've been getting. You know, the few comments I've been getting, I really appreciate it. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you whenever I can get the next video out. Peace.